The child care crisis is worsening in the U.S. The Treasury Department reports the average cost of a year's worth of child care is about $10,000 per child. It consumes about 13% of a family's income. And for some families, the cost of child care is more than their mortgage. The New York Times shares the story of one family who pays almost $2,000 a month for their 2 children. That cost amounts to a third of their income and more than the payment on their 3-bedroom house. Another family, also with 2 children, say their child care costs twice as much as their mortgage. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS MoneyWatch reporter Megan Cerullo. Hi, Megan. Great to see you. So as we were saying, many people are claiming that they pay more for child care than for their mortgage. So this kind of disparity points to a pretty significant structural issue. Why does this remain such a major problem in this country?
The current system is untenable, and it's long had issues. The pandemic has cracked open how broken the child care system in the U.S. is. Like the Times reported, its child care is simply out of reach for many families. I spoke to someone who said that child care for her one son would cost more than she spends each month on rent. So it's unaffordable to families, and it's difficult for centers to actually hang on to staffers because they are paid so little. Many early education, the workforce is made up primarily of women and minority women who are underpaid. And so they're starting to leave the industry and go work at places like Starbucks, Target, McDonald's, because they make more and they earn benefits like tuition assistance. And they simply can't afford to take care of their own families if they stay in this industry.
Right. Well, it's very interesting because there's also sort of in many big urban centers where there are a lot of, working women who make good salaries, there are sort of these, networks of caretakers and nannies who make, $20, $25, $30 an hour. And that's a lot of money, considering that there's no degree needed in many cases for this. And then, of course, you're talking about child care centers in sort of maybe less wealthy areas. And how are they going to attract workers, right? Knowing that in other areas, these child care workers could be making this amount of money, right? So it is a big systemic problem, and that it has been seen largely as a private issue. It's been dealt with for generations as something that parents have to deal with, right? If you're wealthy enough, you can hire, your child care, and if you're not, you just have to figure it out, right? But Democrats are now shifting this to a public issue. Should child care be a public responsibility, and should it be accessible to everyone and not just the wealthy?
Right. So what happens is these child care workers, many of whom are qualified and educated and have degrees, as they become more experienced and more educated, what they do is they move into the public school system where they earn more and earn benefits and can afford to take care of their own families. And so what the Biden administration wants to do through its Build Back Better Act, part of what it wants to do is provide pay parity for early childhood educators with kindergarten through 12th grade educators. And that would incentivize them to stay in the industry, because a lot of these caregivers that I've spoken to have said they actually really like the work. They love working with children. They're good at it. But it's just they can't make ends meet. They can't make a living. And then what the centers say, what the providers say, is that they would love to be able to pay their workers more. They value them. But if they do, they'd have to then pass those costs along to families. And it would put childcare out of reach for these families, for the very families that they want to serve.
So then is the answer to have childcare be partially government subsidized to make up for that difference?
Advocates say that federal intervention at this point is necessary, or else we're just going to continue to rely on this patchwork system comprised mostly of independent operators, and there are going to be these gaps in who can afford childcare when it's something that's really crucial that all American families have access to.
And of course, as you mentioned, the pandemic makes this crisis so much worse, or at least made it clear how bad it's been, right? So this was evident in the September jobs report, which revealed fewer people are getting back to work than expected. And of course, women remain a big group there. So if President Biden's child care proposals don't pass, what can we expect in terms of fixing this crisis? Are there other potential solutions on the horizon?
Well, this would be a historic provision, and it would be by far the largest investment in history. And advocates say that it's really, really essential. And short of the government subsidizing child care, employers are weighing sort of building child care centers and providing childcare for their workers because they value the talent, and they recognize that many women in particular in a heterosexual couple with children, in many cases the woman earns less than her husband does, and so she's the one who's leaving the labor force altogether. And in the September jobs report, it revealed a dip in women's participation in the labor force, and that's really going to erode a lot of progress that women have made over the past decade. And it's this macroeconomic issue too that affects not only families but the entire economy, because women in more cases than men aren't able to contribute and participate.
Can we look at how other sort of industrialized nations deal with childcare to get sort of some examples, or are there no countries who really have the childcare situation figured out?
In the U.S., I think the profession, I think it's one of the lowest earning professions. I think 98% of other types of workers earn more. And other countries, I'm not as familiar with other countries' systems, but there are places in which it's viewed as a public good. And it's looking like, at least according to those who know the industry best, that's the route we should go to.
All right. Well, Megan Cerullo, thank you so much for joining us. As always, we appreciate your insight.
Thanks, Tanya.